Welcome back. In the last video we created the HTML for the header section. We included the top navigation bar with the menu links, the main background image, and also the feature text. So in this video we're going to make our website look more like the finished project by adding the CSS. So we're going to change the link color and background for the navigation, and we're also going to style the text and make sure that it's horizontally and vertically aligned to the background image. We'll also take a look at the Bootstrap grid system, and I'll show you how to add columns to our website to make it responsive. So let's get started in our text editor. We need to pull up the sidebar and go into our custom CSS. So just below the body, still within the global section, the first thing I need to add is a max width for the images, and we're going to set them to 100%, which stops images stretching too big. So let's create a comment for the navbar section. So we're going to get started with the navbar section, and the main navigation has the class of navbar. So this is the part we'll be styling first. So dot and then navbar. So we need to add the purple background color. So the background is going to have a number of 97689. See? And let's check that's working okay. So the background color has changed, but we need to get rid of the margin, which is at the very bottom, and pushing the background image down. So we simply do that by changing the margin bottom to be 0. Okay. And the next thing I want to do is remove the default border. It's pretty hard to see the default border around the navigation bar, but we can remove that by just setting the border to be 0. And then now we need to change the text for the logo and the navigation. So Bootstrap has a lot of classes and a lot of CSS, which is included as standard, and it can be sometimes difficult to find exactly which class we need to amend. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to go into the browser developer tools. So in Chrome you need to right click and select inspect element, and then if you select the magnifying glass and then just hover over the element we need to change and click, and then we should get a list of the classes which is affecting this particular element. So we can see the first element is the color for the navbar default navbar brand, and that's in the Bootstrap minified version. So we can change that color. So I'm just going to copy the class which affects that color, and then back into our custom CSS. Let's paste this in and change the color to be white, and that changes the color of the logo. We need to also do the same for the navigation links, which is the home, blog and latest news. So again, do the same, select the magnifying glass and choose one of the links, and again we can override the standard default grey color by copying the Bootstrap class, and because we also want this to be white, we can add this in the same section. And that changes those to white. And then on the smaller mobile view, we also want the three icon bars to be white too. So again, select the magnifying glass, and if you can just select one of the icon bars and make sure you can find the one which controls the background color. Copy the classes, and then let's put those into our CSS. And let's change the default background color. We'll change that to white and refresh. Great, so there we go. So the icon bars are all white now. So that's all the styling we need to add to the top navigation bar. So now we can move down to the featured area and we can start working on positioning the image and the text. So let's create a new comment for the feature section. And so we can add the text over the image, we need to use some relative and absolute positioning. So we need to make the container relative, so we can position the text within it. So the container for the feature section had a class of feature, which is a custom class we added ourselves. So let's start by adding that and setting the position to be relative. And because we want the background image to stretch to be the same width as the browser, we need to override the maximum width of 100% by adding the feature image class. And instead of max width, we're just going to set the width, this time of 100%. And this means that the image can stretch slightly larger or slightly smaller than the original size of the image. So now we've got the container positioned relative, we now need to change the text to be absolute. So we added another custom class, surrounded the text, which was a class of feature text. So next, let's start with that. So first, position is going to be set to absolute. And because we're using absolute positioning, we're going to set both the top and the bottom position to be equal. So they're both going to be 0. And now because that's positioned absolute, the text now appears over the image. So we can start working with getting it horizontally and vertically aligned. So we're going to start by vertically aligning the text now. So first of all, I'm going to just type this out and then I'll explain what this is doing afterwards. So the feature text class and then before. So set the content to be empty. The display type to be inline block. The height to take up 100% of the container. And lastly, vertical align to be middle. And we'll come back to that just in a moment. We'll just first of all add the styles for the text. So the feature class, and then the P, which surrounds the text. So this is going to also have the display type of inline block, and it will all come clear soon. Also vertical align to be middle. The text align will be centralized in the div. The width to be 100% of the container. So if we go back into the browser, and if we take a look at the finished project, there's a background color. It's quite faint, but it surrounds the text, which has rounded edges, and it's also semi-transparent. So let's add that now. So to start, we can add the background color, which has a RGBA value. So first of all, we need to add the red, green, and blue values. So to create the grey color, the first value is 74, 82, 95, and then the last value is the alpha, or the opacity. So I want that to be 0.2, which is the same as 20% opacity. The background has got rounded corners, which we get by adding a border radius of 10 pixels. The text color is white. Okay, so there's the background for the text in place. So basically what we're doing here is we're creating some text and we're adding some styles to it. And then we're adding a fake element just before the text, so we can use that as a full height reference to align the text in the div. So before the text, we're creating an empty div which has no content. We're setting both the fake div and the text to be inline block, so they appear side by side. And because the fake element has a height of 100%, this will take up the full height of the div. And then because this is the full height of the div, we can then set the vertical align to be middle, and this will cause the text to be aligned in the middle of the div. So to get this trick to work, we just need to do one more thing. Because by default, inline block has a gap between elements, we need to remove this. So we need to add a property which is 0 width. So if we change the font size to be 0, that will remove the gap between the fake element and the text. Because we've set the font size to be 0, we'll then need to add the font size in the p tags. So we want ours to be 48 pixels. So let's save that and check that on the browser. Okay, that's looking good. That's now vertically aligned to the background image. And we can also see the semi-transparent background color. So let's just add a little bit of padding, just of 3%. And space out the line height to be 80 pixels. And let's save and take a look at that. Great, so that's looking a lot better now. The next thing we need to do is align it horizontally in the div. So we're going to do that by adding some bootstrap columns. So if we head back to getbootstrap.com, and then if we go in the CSS section, and then select the grid system on the right, and then scroll down to the grid options. So Bootstrap has a 12 column grid system, and to access that we use the class prefix of col and then dash, and then we can use the XS for the number of columns wide we want in extra small devices, SM for small devices or tablets, MD for medium devices or desktops, or LG for large desktops. So we can create divs which display differently on smaller or larger devices. So there's an example below. If we want to create a div which has 2 parts and spans the full width of the page, each div needs to take up 6 columns each. And the same if we want to create 3 columns side by side, we'll give each div a class of 4 columns. So let's put this into practice in our project. Back into the index page, if we look for the div which surrounds the text, just after the feature text class, we're going to add the bootstrap columns. So we want the text to take up all the available space on a mobile view. So we can add col XS for extra small devices, 12. So that will take up the full 12 columns on a small device. If we don't want it to be full width on larger devices, we can add col MD8. So that will take up 8 parts of 12, or 2/3. And then larger still, on large desktops, col LG6. So that will take up half the width of the web page. So let's save that and take a look. So if we scroll down to the small size, you can see the text takes up the full width. But once we hit the medium devices, this div is only taking up 8 parts. And because it's only taking up 8 parts, it's leaving 4 columns on the right hand side. So to make sure that this div stays in the middle of the page, we can add an offset on the left hand side. So to centralize this div, we need to add an offset of 2. And the way we do that is col. So the first one is MD, then dash offset. And then to offset it 2 columns, we set that to 2. So let's save that and see if that's working okay. Great, so the 8 column div is in the middle of the page with 2 columns either side now. And we'll do the same for the large devices. Because the large devices is taking up 6 parts, we need to add an offset of 3. So call LG offset 3. There we go. And the Bootstrap documentation's got some more information about the grid system and offsetting. There's also some examples you can take a look at in the offsetting section. So that's this video nearly finished. Just one more thing we need to add before we go is if we shrink the browser down, the text is pretty large. So when we get down to the small tablet or mobile sizes, we need to make sure that the text is smaller. So we can do that in our CSS by adding a media query. So let's add a mobile styling comment just at the very bottom of the page. Okay, so let's add a media query. So at media, screen, and we'll target the devices with a max width of 768 pixels. And by using 768 pixels, this keeps it in line with Bootstrap's media queries. So if we go back up to the top of the grid system, you can see the media query sizes that Bootstrap uses. So we're setting our media query for extra small devices, less than 768 pixels. Okay, so to reduce the font size, we need to add the class of feature text, and then P. And just add a space after and. There we go. So we need to reduce the font size. Let's set this to 28 pixels, and also the line height. That can be the same, that can also be 28 pixels. So let's save that and head back into the browser. So if we go back into the project and then shrink the browser down, you can see that the text now scales down on the smaller devices and fits within the container. And as we get larger and hit the media query, we'll get the larger text. So that's looking a lot better. So while we're in the media query, we can also just make the three links in the mobile view appear in the center of the page, and we can add that in the LIA section because these are list item hyperlinks. So text align center. There we go. So great, so that's it for this section. That's all the CSS completed for the header. So if you join me in the next video, we'll continue with the website and move down to the welcome section.